Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, joined as always by our producer, Justin Stein, and we're bringing back the gang today for the SIS Football Research team. James Weaver and Alex Vigderman here with us today to talk about the teams, where they stand in the NFL through what we used to call the quarter point of the season. Now it's slightly less than the quarter point of the season, which brings up the question of leap seasons. I've been meaning to ask you about, Alex. Is that something? No, I'm just kidding.
I was thinking, do we get to the quarter pole at like 4:00 on Sunday? Like
during witching hour?
Yeah.
I think that's about right. Your joke is better than mine. Let's start off, before we start talking about where all the teams stand right now, let's start off in talking about the number one quarterback in the world. For those of you that don't know, this is a ranking system that is exactly like it sounds. And I'll flip over to Alex to kind of give a little bit of background on it and talk about where the list stands right now.
Sure. So first of all, we are making a probably fair assumption that the best quarterbacks in the world are playing in the NFL right now. But, there might be some counterexamples that some people might think of.
Stroud and Bryce Young, or are you talking about
I think
LeBron played quarterback?
There's LeBron playing quarterback. There might be like some dude in Germany, whatever.
I can't say his name. Wabanyama, whatever his name is.
He could
play whatever position he wants.
He can sling it. Yeah. So the world's number one ranking concept comes from something that Bill James came up with on the baseball side, and this is sort of appropriate timing because we're working on the Bill James handbook in the baseball department right now. And that ranking system is basically meant to use a relatively long rolling window of time, multiple years of data to evaluate, in the initial case, starting pitchers, but in our case, quarterbacks. And so we're using our total points system, but more accurately, the sort of points above average subcomponent of that to evaluate players where we're weighting recent performance, where we're using a multi-year sample. And we're also accounting for if a guy misses time, whether it's because he was benched or he was injured or something like that, he sort of drops a little bit slowly in the rankings as his rating basically decays. And so we use this as an understanding of where we're at in terms of the overall quality of quarterbacks in the league.
And we should give the caveats. Yes, we understand that any list of the quarterbacks, ranking them, people are going to have issues with, whether a human makes it or a machine. We think this is a really good system. We don't think it's a perfect system. We don't think there's any such thing as a perfect system, but it's pretty cool because it does take in multiple years of performance. It does weight recent performance. It's kind of like who's hot right now. And the other thing you have to understand is if somebody's been injured, they're going to be a little bit lower on the list. So just don't get too upset. But I do think it's a good kind of jumping off point for debate. So what is the list showing us today?
We'll go over the top 10 to start off. So the current top 10, we have a couple of tiers, basically. We
going
top,
from low to high or high to low?
Yeah, I guess we can. Sure, we'll do low to high. So the lower tier is, and actually that tier sort of continues outside the top 10. But so you could really go almost all the way down to 15 or 16 with all these guys in the same tier. But basically 10 Russell Wilson, 9 Ryan Tannehill, which is probably a little bit controversial in this moment, but he's coming off a good game and is in that sort of tier. 8 Joe Burrow, 7 Tua. He started 23 at the start of the year, had that monster game in week 2, and the injury is obviously going to cause some drop there.
Trickling back down that list now as other people play more than him.
Yeah, for sure. 6 Stafford, and then you get into the sort of elite guys. There's a real jump from Stafford into the top 5, which is then Brady and Rodgers, and then the top 3 is Herbert, Mahomes, and number 1 Josh Allen.
I was good with everything. Josh Allen, number 1, really?
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that this is measured in sort of points above average per play within this rolling window context, and the difference between Allen and Mahomes goes into the 1,000th place. So
they're really close. And does it matter that Josh Allen is attempting 75% of the Bills' offense is going through him?
It doesn't matter. So the reason we're using points above average is to limit some of that, where you're not getting credit for showing up. You do have to perform above average in order to do that. But in general, passing is going to produce some positive results on average as long as you're Josh Allen, right? So if you're an above average quarterback and you're throwing it a lot, then yes, you will show up more. But I think that's fair. You're shouldering a bigger burden in the offense. So I don't think that's entirely unreasonable to give him credit for having more attempts.
Right. If they're using him in the offense more, that's probably fair, right? If you have two quarterbacks and one of them's throwing it 35 times per game and one of them's throwing it 25 times per game, the guy who throws 35 times per game isn't necessarily going to come out better, but he's going to have more chances to create more value.
Yeah. And I don't think we need to get too far into the like best versus most valuable, like semantic conversation, but this is meant, like we're talking about this in the context of like best. So it's not necessarily like
value, not just efficient.
So in that sense, it is a fair concern to say a guy who is throwing more, just has more opportunity, isn't necessarily better. He's producing more value. And so using points above average does a little bit of a better job at getting to the best question as opposed to the most valuable question.
James, do you have any reactions to what you heard in the top 10 there?
Yeah, I guess I was just going to ask, in terms of Josh Allen, does the fact that he is the Bills' leading rusher also have anything to do with that ranking?
That is a very good question. Yes, it does. Well, it doesn't know that he's the leading rusher, but it does know that rushing contributes. And for quarterbacks in particular, there's a sort of give and take with that. Like Lamar Jackson is 17th right now, and he's actually only had one positive game this year. And one of the things that has sort of plagued him in past years has been fumbles. And so guys who are getting stripped a lot, when we're measuring it from the perspective of points above average, which treats all fumbles as basically a coin toss between getting recovered or not. So even if you're recovering all of those fumbles, you're still introducing risk. And so you're definitely going to get dinged for that sort of thing. Lamar in particular is also getting punished because he's been really polarizing in terms of early down versus late down performance. In terms of the points above average per play, just passing, he's third best on early downs and fifth worst on late downs. And then in rushing, again, comparing to all rushers, not just quarterbacks, he's in the top 10 on early downs, and there haven't been that many players who have enough carries on late downs to say anything. But of the 4 players who have at least 10 attempts on late downs, he's in last, and he's almost a full point per play worse than like Jalen Hurts, who's doing the best. So he's had a lot of like third and fourth and short getting stuffed at the line, where the total points system, if you're getting hit at the line, it expects you to fall forward, get pushed through contact and get an extra yard or two. So if you're getting hit at the line on a third and fourth and 1, total points is typically going to expect you to actually still get that last yard a lot of the time.
These are like 80-90% conversion situations. If you don't convert, it's going to be a big hit.
Yeah, and Lamar had that one long touchdown against the Dolphins was on third down, so like his total production is a little bit different as a consequence, but in terms of like his success rate, it's definitely a little down on those third and fourth down like sneak type plays.
And we talk about EPA and all this, the benefits of it. In fact, if people haven't listened, I recommend going and listen back a few episodes where we really broke down EPA for all of its good and all of its bad. But it seems like in one sense, EPA might be kind of like treating him, quote unquote, unfairly or fairly, depending on how you look at it, because the third and fourth downs are going to create so much more of an effect than the good stuff he's doing on first and second down. On the other hand, Lamar Jackson, for all the armchair analysis of how good a passer he's become, if that's not coming through on third and fourth down, to me, that's a scary sign. That's a red flag, because the issue is not if Lamar Jackson can throw on first down when he's got play action available to him and all that kind of stuff. But if he's got to get in the shotgun on third down and pick up 3rd and 10, those are the exact situations that I think people are concerned about with Lamar Jackson. So is that a bit of a red flag there, or do you expect this is kind of, as more time will go on, his performance will sort of make the statistics regress to the mean?
I think that's a good point. And so I had tweeted about this concept last week, I think, and a lot of people came back with saying, yeah, he does really well on first and second down, and then he doesn't have to do anything on third down. And like, if you're successful on early downs, who cares how bad you are? Yeah. But part of the reason for that is they're getting these really big chunk plays that aren't necessarily sustainable. So there is a give and take there where, like, yes, ideally you'd be so successful on first and second down that you don't get to third down. But if those plays, and typically we think of first and second down as being more stable, more reliable than performance on late downs. But if the plays that you're getting those first downs on early downs are those bigger chunk plays that are not necessarily something that you can bank on, then maybe there is some instability to his performance.
How much stuff have we done and maybe other people done in terms of looking at individual players versus like the population in the terms that you're just discussing? We might be getting kind of like too inside baseball right now and like mathy, but I am kind of curious about that. Like, for example, when we look at pressure rate and how quarterbacks kind of own their pressure rate to an extent, and how Russell Wilson, for example, throughout his career has been a little bit better under pressure than we would expect most quarterbacks to be under pressure. So he's both making himself get pressured more and resisting some of the negative effects that being under pressure gives you. Could there be something to that would apply to this situation with Lamar Jackson's performance on third downs? Like, we say most quarterbacks have more predictive performance on first and second down compared to third down. But is that because Tom Brady's really good on third down and there are a lot of quarterbacks that are really bad on third down? Or is it because each of those individuals has that level of variance associated with them? Am I making sense?
I think that this might be a more apt conversation with like a Justin Herbert, where he time after time is getting 3rd and 10 conversions and these like big plays on late downs. And yeah, but I think that there is a more obvious failing that comes from not getting the first and second downs and then putting yourself in third down positions that sort of communicates something about how you perform than allowing pressure and then succeeding in that pressure. Like, if you're able to work deeper into your progressions and see the rush and get away from the rush and succeed through that, you have not, like, pressure is just sort of the indication of possible future failure, but is not actually, until something bad happens, pressure isn't really anything, right? Pressure just sort of begets bad performance. Whereas they're not analogous. Yeah. If you're really successful on third and longs, you were definitively not good on first and second and down. And that's where this is really more related to Herbert than for Lamar, because it's the reverse, where Lamar is doing a lot better on first and second down. But that's the sort of thing I'm thinking about.
Well, we should like pull back the nerdiness a little bit here. Mark's been trying to get me to make like Twitter polls and things like that as part of the podcast. So maybe this is a good opportunity. We will put our first ever Twitter poll together. And since it's me, James, and Alex having this conversation, it can be, should Bryce Rossler do more research into this subject?
Yeah. So one more note on the list, a guy outside the top 10, but who's in that sort of like collection of guys just past that, is Geno Smith, who we all expected to be in the 14th slot after last week. He's jumped 18 spots in the last 2 weeks. But of course, so jumping from 32 to 14 is not like, there's a big sort of middle section of players who are rated very similarly. But just in the last 2 weeks, he's produced double the passing EPA and similarly double the passing points above average of any other player. And in those last 2 games, he's second in on-target percentage. And the players around him, he's been throwing it 9 or 10 yards downfield. And the guys around him are in like the 6 to 7 yard range. So in these last 2 games, he's been like really lights out in a way that is very interesting to see. And I'm sure Seahawks fans are like cackling to themselves about it.
I'm pretty sure. So Aaron Glenn, former Jet great, he started his coaching career working in the Jets front office. And this is around the time that they drafted Geno Smith. Was last week a conspiracy? Did Aaron Glenn just lay down for Geno Smith? Is he trying to get that man paid? Is he getting his cut?
I don't know that we want to delve too much into that.
But yeah, no, Geno's been amazing. We're reaching a point where we almost have to like discount quarterback performance against the Lions as if they're like an FCS team playing against an SEC team. Like statistically, that game was just on its whole other level.
Yeah, I was going to say I have to take a look at the other 3 quarterback situations of who the Lions had faced, and did Aaron Glenn have a part in selecting those quarterbacks as well?
Reasonable. All right. Anything else you guys wanted to touch on with the number one quarterback in the world?
I'll mention just because, guys who get bandied about in like MVP type conversations, go Birds. Jalen Hurts started the season 25th up to 11th now. So he has not been like outstanding in the last couple games and the defense has really taken it up a notch, but the team's looking really solid, and the ability to have those two really good receivers on the outside and a solid tight end, and the way they ran the ball this past week, like that's a scary team.
Yeah, for sure. And that is a good sort of segue over into our conversation of the contenders and pretenders in the league. Obviously, as we look at the teams, I wrote for 33rd Team this week about all of the different teams in the league tiered off by their records. And at the top of that list, of course, would be the lone unbeaten 4-0 Philadelphia Eagles. And let's talk through those a little bit. James, you also wrote about defenses in the NFL from 1 to 32 in terms of efficiency. I'm looking at you for some insight there. But starting off with Alex's Birds, what I look at there, first of all, like the EPA per play numbers are just ridiculous. Overall, early downs, late downs, red zone, and middle of the field, all of those situations on both offense and defense, they're in the top 10. So they've been very good so far this year. There are a lot of questions. Is A.J. Brown a true number one? Did they do the right thing in moving the draft capital that they did to acquire him? So far, both he and Jalen Hurts are amongst the total points leaders at their positions in the NFL. And I think it's been a rousing success. Anything you guys would add, with the only 4-0 team before we get into some of the teams that you could at least start to debate how they've been over the first quarter?
I think watching, so I was at the Ravens-Dolphins game a couple weeks ago and watched Tua throw for 1,000,000 yards and 1,000,000 touchdowns, and then watched the Eagles play on Monday night the day afterwards. And I really felt that that Jalen Hurts was playing better than Tua did in that game. And I was absolutely not feeling that last year. And even through like week one, his average throw depth was like 4 or 5 yards or something. So like they've built an offense that helps sort of limit his exposure. Having a guy like Brown who is more physical in the middle of the field, shorter stuff, doesn't need to obviously will make plays downfield, but like doesn't need all that space. I think he really helps give a dimension to the offense that it didn't have the last several years, really, since I guess Alshon Jeffrey was in his prime, but he's a different kind of player. So yeah, the Jalen Hurts thing is pretty impressive, and I still am looking to see him perform against the toughest defenses. It was great to see them get a comeback win last week against the Jaguars. I definitely felt like as soon as they got down by a couple scores, that was a big moment for them.
Yeah, certainly those are the questions there. Just like we always had the same questions kind of with Lamar Jackson being the athletic type of quarterback.
And a team that is built around the run. Like they ran so much last year that we really felt like they needed to have more of an expansion of the passing offense to be able to get back into games in those kinds of situations.
I think to your point, though, making it fit into Jalen Hurts' skill set, A.J. Brown's so difficult to tackle after the catch, like that Debo type. So you take the running backs, Miles Sanders and company, you take Jalen Hurts, and you take A.J. Brown. Those are three really difficult people to tackle on a down in and down out basis that you've got to account for. A lot easier when it was just those two guys that were lined up right next to each other that you had to account for. Now with A.J. Brown in the mix.
The one thing I am a little nervous about is they have had a lot of guys like into and out of the lineup and the offensive line. And it has been a great offensive line, but there's only so much of that you can take.
All right, let's move forward and let's talk about some of the 3-1 teams. There are a handful of teams that I think you could kind of subdivide into tiers, in my opinion. So at 3-1, in order of point differential, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Cowboys, the Dolphins, the Packers, the Vikings, and the Giants. I think those kind of divide themselves out well there. The Bills and the Chiefs, to me, I would put above the Eagles. Those are probably the only two teams that I'd put above the Eagles in terms of like my personal power rankings right now. Just knowing what we knew about those teams going into the year and the way that they've looked so far. And then point differential wise, the Bills have the top point differential in the league. They've been crushing it. And then the Chiefs, for their part, they played 38% of their offensive snaps with 2 or more tight ends, 12 personnel, 13 personnel. and they lead the NFL in offensive EPA per play through the first month. So to me, that's a huge storyline with the departure of Tyreek Hill. So I kind of pause there. To me, those are the top two of the 3-1 teams. Anything you guys would add on those two?
Yeah, I guess to add on to the Bills a little bit defensively, they've really been able to get it done on the pass rush. They're 6th in pressure rate so far this year, and they're ranked 2nd in sack percentage. Adding in Von Miller was definitely no joke, and it certainly helped that out. But it's also been the development of Greg Russo, too, on the other side. Right now he's tied for 5th in sacks and has been a good compliment to Von on the other side. I know they're banged up a little bit on the safety side of things, but they're still waiting one of the best corners in football to come back in Trey White. So there's definitely upside with the Bills' defense still to come.
Yeah, that's awesome. The amount of injuries that they've had that they've been going through, and it just seems like they've been able to just move right along and not miss a beat. Really, I think on all levels of the defense, they've been dealing with injuries. So that's been really impressive to me. And I thought you hit the nail on the head there. Greg Rousseau, not just outside, but also showing the ability because of the injuries they've had to defensive tackle. He's bumped down inside some too, and he's been really wreaking some havoc from inside there. So good to see, he was like a piece of clay that they really had to mold coming out. But in his second season, he's looking like he's the truth for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
After the Bills and Chiefs, there's actually all of the rest of the 3-1 teams have outscored their opponents by single-digit margins. And there are 6 teams that are 2-2 that have better point differentials than them. So you start off with the sort of middle tier Cowboys, Dolphins, Packers of the world. Dolphins and Cowboys both have dealt with quarterback injuries now. Cowboys win 3 straight with Cooper Rush. The Dolphins start off by winning 3 straight with Tua. Those teams, I think, are we know as little about those teams as I think anybody in the NFL at this point in terms of what they can become. I don't know if you guys feel like you have a better hold on what they'll be and as they'll move through the season with quarterback changes. But what do you guys make of the Dolphins and the Cowboys?
I feel like the Dolphins are going to be really interesting with Bridgewater because last year there was so much talk about how they didn't let Tua throw it downfield and they were so conservative, and Jalen Waddle's getting all these targets short. And, now they add Tyreek Hill and they suddenly look a lot more explosive. I'm curious to see if, with Bridgewater as the primary starter and a game plan around him, does it still look like that? Or does it get scaled back and look more like the offense last year, even with Hill in the fold? I think if they can retain that level of explosiveness, then I don't think it's much of a drop off at all necessarily, because it's not like Tua is bringing a dynamic athletic aspect. I mean, he escapes well in the pocket and that sort of thing. And obviously, maybe there's some effect of switching from a primarily left-handed quarterback to a right-handed quarterback. But
they have a better left tackle than they do a right tackle. That's one thing that helps.
Yeah, because I think I'm curious. I guess I haven't thought much about is it weirder to switch from thinking primarily about a right-handed quarterback and then going to lefty or vice versa. But
it's weirder to go from right to left than to go from left to right. If you go from right to left, it's like, whoa, everything's weird. The ball's tailing the opposite way for the receivers, all that kind of stuff. It can be an advantage if you get used to it because the defense really isn't used to facing a left-handed offense. But when you have a lefty and then they get injured and you go back to a righty, it's kind of like going back to everything being back
normal.
to normal. Yeah. Just everybody's so much more accustomed to that from all the other levels of football they might have played at, even if you have a lefty quarterback like they do.
We got to do some kind of weird quarterback experiments where they just throw in a lefty for the third quarter or something.
Yeah, we need controlled trials for this sort of a thing. Yeah, I'm with you. It'll be interesting. I think when Bridgewater first came in, when Tua was injured initially, that 2-minute drill, it was scary. It was negative average depth of target. It was a problem. But as he played in this last game, he had this one ball that looked like it traveled about 50 yards in the air. So that might have been the maximum distance that Bridgewater can throw the ball at this point in his career. We'll see what he can do. The good news for them is that according to our strength of schedule model, they don't face another top 10 team until December. So we'll see if Teddy can keep the wheels on. Talking about the Packers are a little bit different than those two teams, but I think the story with them so far this year has been them kind of finding their footing after that first game and with the lack of offensive weapons. I think we're starting to get a sense of how that's going to unfold, kind of like the Chiefs leaning into 12 personnel. They've increased their use of 12 personnel, 2 tight ends 31% of the time, which is second in the league. And they've decreased their use of 11, which you would expect Matt LaFleur to be sitting in all the time, down to 51%, which is 27th. It goes along with how they've been performing. This seems like a self-scouting thing for me because they've been at negative 0.13 EPA per play from 11 compared to positive 0.19 per play from 12. So I think with the Packers, they're finding their answer, and it's with more tight ends on the field.
And that's kind of interesting because Rodgers somewhat notably has not really been a heavy user of tight ends. He's had these like sort of spike seasons from a touchdown perspective, but they've never really been big parts of an Aaron Rodgers led offense.
At least in the case of Mercedes Lewis, they're just using him as a blocker. Like he's an offensive lineman essentially at this point in his career.
I'll be honest, when I hear his name every once in a while, I have taken aback. It takes my breath away that he's still around.
Breathtaking indeed. All right. Also breathtaking. The final 2 3-1 teams, the Vikings and the Giants. New coaches, feeling good right now, but I have major questions about these two teams. For me, they're more in the pretender category. In the Vikings case, they are not in the top 10 of any of those categories that I said with the Eagles, that they were in the top 10 of all of them. And the Giants offense has created negative expected points, Adam. I don't have trust in Daniel Jones, despite the way that they've been able to mask them. The 3 Giants wins have come against bottom 10 teams in strength of schedule, and that schedule tightens up over the next month. Either of you guys want to argue in favor of the Vikings or the Giants?
I mean, I don't know, James. You wrote that article before the season about the Vikings being and Kirk Cousins being a sneaky MVP candidate, if I remember, or taking the over on his passing stats.
I did, yeah. Obviously, things haven't clicked as they would intend to so far. So hopefully I'm going to attribute that to early coaching and finding their way down the road. Their defense hasn't been spectacular either, as they rank in the bottom 5 of defensive EPA per play. So we'll see if they can get that ship turned around. My other note was going to be adding on the Giants of our quote unquote, how we mentioned, improved offensive line did not look as such against the Cowboys on Monday night, that game. So we'll see if those two teams can turn it around.
It's a scary pass rush. So we don't do enough at times to account for the caliber of the team you're facing, especially when we're talking about like early season stats, when like a quarter of your total stats are against one particular defense. So that's a tough spot for them, certainly. But I definitely buy the Vikings more than I do the Giants. And the nice thing for both of those teams, I suppose, is that they've banked the wins that they have. So if they regress or even if they stay in the exact, performance level that they have, they've at least banked a couple of wins that they might not have had based on just their underlying performance.
Yeah, it's good to be 3-1. And I'll shout Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal for the Giants. They could be really great tackles that play for them for years to come, but against Micah Parsons definitely looks a little different. I will say, James, in your defense, I don't think Kirk Cousins has been the Vikings' problem. That's not been apparent. So let's see if they can sort out that defense, like you mentioned. All right, we get to the rank and file of the league. I'm curious. I'll reel off the 2-2 teams here, and then you guys can let me know if there are any that you're interested in talking about. The Jacksonville Jaguars is a bit of a surprise there. And then the Niners, Bengals, Ravens, Buccaneers, and Browns. Those are all of our teams that were above that list of 3-1 teams in terms of point differential. Then we get to the Falcons and the Broncos, which have kind of been right around even in terms of their differential. And then the negative teams, Chicago, Arizona, the surprising Chargers, the Seahawks, the surprising Rams, the Jets, and the maybe surprising Titans.
Yeah, I have 2 quick things on a couple of the AFC North teams. I know we had talked about Lamar Jackson earlier, so I'll talk about the other side of the ball. Defensively, the Ravens have been a massive, massive disappointment so far. And surprisingly, that's only really happened in second halves. In the first halves of games, the Ravens were 6th in EPA per pass, allowing negative 0.17 and only 17th in rushing defense. But in second halves, those numbers fall to 30th for EPA per pass and 28th in EPA per rush. I know they've gotten out to big leads against the likes of the Dolphins and Bills, and they just haven't been able to hold on to those in the second half. So that's something that needs corrected, obviously, if they want to live up to their expectation and running the table for the AFC North.
Some injuries, but some just kind of breakdowns in their philosophy. They want to play man coverage on the back end and be able to kind of dictate things from there. But when you have those injuries and when you have the lesser performance, it becomes those breakdowns start to show up really quickly, and they've given up big plays like crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. The other team I wanted to talk about was the Bengals, who are 6th in overall EPA per play on defense. And that goes to say as well, having the 10th highest pressure rate and only the 29th highest sack rate in the league. So there's even more room to grow on them for defensive potential in terms of getting to the quarterback and getting more pressures. And the sky's really the limit for them on defense.
That's interesting. I did not realize the Bengals have been that good defensively. I know Trey Hendrickson has been playing lights out. You said 10th in pressure rate versus 29th in sack rate. And even given that,
yeah,
that's pretty impressive. So the listeners aren't picking up what you're putting down. We would expect teams with high pressure rates to have better sack rates in the future. So there's kind of meat on the bone there in terms of they could really, really heat up on that side of the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're obviously a very random game against the Steelers in week 1 away from being 3-1 as well. So I think they'll be just fine going forward.
Other teams I think will be fine going over. The 2 LA teams, 2-2, can't be happy with where they are, but I think there's room for optimism. They both had fairly difficult schedules to start the year based on our model. And the Chargers are 25th in red zone EPA per play. I would be shocked if that persisted throughout the season. We know how volatile red zone performance can be, and we'd expect Justin Herbert to have something to say about that. And the Rams are dead last in early down efficiency, which is like mind-boggling. But if you've watched the Rams this year, you've seen a lot of them trying to 3 yards in a cloud of dust it on early downs, kind of seeming like they've been running into themselves there. So I think those two teams, I'm very far from wanting to count either of them out, despite some signs of concern early in the year.
Yeah, I agree on the Rams front in terms of the 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Like I've heard the stat now multiple times this week about Cam Akers' stuff rate versus Darrell Henderson's stuff rate. Like Akers is stuffed like he's stuffed like 35% of the time or something on, for 0 yards or less. And Henderson's at like 5% of his carries. And some of that is just like usage, right? If you're running in more run situations or running in pass situations, you might have different expectations. But like that is part of just sort of like figuring out your personnel and figuring out what works for you. And I do think they're kind of still scrambling a little bit to just get their offense worked out.
Yep. I think once they figure out, like we were talking about, some of these teams that are getting away from the 11 personnel, putting an extra tight end on the field, I'll be curious to see where the Rams shake out in terms of that, because we have seen them adapt at times over the years, even though they have been a heavy 11 team under Sean McVay.
Yeah, I mean, when they started out, they were 11, like they had the same look all the time. Yeah.
And then injuries, and then some 12 during the playoffs and their Super Bowl run, and it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. I think we all have a lot of faith in Sean McVay's ability to figure that sort of thing out, where we might not have as much faith. And if Bryce was here, he would make some sort of comment about Matt Stafford being injured, because the returns on that side, he doesn't look like the Matt Stafford, the arm strength that we're all accustomed to. All right, 2-2. We have the Jaguars from the AFC South. We have the Titans from the AFC South. And let's throw in the 1-2-1 Indianapolis Colts into the conversation. Where do you guys make the AFC South? I don't even know where to start with these teams.
At least the Jaguars have like upside in the way that, I mean, I guess the Titans were literally the number 1 seed in the AFC last year, but that was a team that we understood at the time didn't have a record that corresponded to their performance. Mm-hmm. And the Derrick Henry thing it's sort of walking on a tightrope when you're leaning on a guy that much. And the skill position players, they go from AJ Brown and Julio Jones to whatever extent they were available to a collection of guys they have now. And Treylon Burks is now banged up. So that team is on the downslope. The Colts, the running game hasn't been as productive and as crucial as it was last year. The quarterback situation has been this weird collection of guys the last few years, and it doesn't seem like Matt Ryan is necessarily going to revolutionize things. So at least with the Jaguars, you're getting young, interesting, talented first-round pick type players, and they're still, the cliche is like they have to figure out how to win. And when they got up by a couple scores against the Eagles and kind of fell apart after that, that's the sort of thing that it'll be interesting to see if that ends up being a trend over the course of the season, or if really the first few games where they looked a lot more successful on offense is the new normal for them.
Sounds like you have faith in former 33rd teamer and Philadelphia Eagle, Doug Peterson.
Yeah, it was looking good out there.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. The good news with all these teams is they all face easy strengths of schedule because they all play against the AFC South. So there'll be opportunities to pick up more wins for them. I think you're right. Trevor Lawrence gives you something to be excited about from a Jaguars perspective, definitely. Matt Ryan, for what it's worth, I'll say I didn't think he was the reason for the Colts' struggles insofar as I've observed them over the last 2 weeks. But they 0-2-1 in that decision to start off the division, to start off the season is a tough place to be. They've had some weird splits. Third most zone scheme runs on offense, with the second worst performance in the league on those runs. So we expect Jonathan Taylor all the time. Maybe they need to get back to more of that gap stuff, that power stuff. And on defense, they played, again, 61% zone coverage in this case, and they're 27th in EPA per snap against zone. So Gus Bradley might need to get out of his comfort zone a little bit in terms of what they've been doing there. We'll see, because the Titans every year, we seem to think that they're going to fall off and they find a way to have the best record. And they've won the division twice in a row. The Colts, we're always expecting them to kind of be what the Bengals were making the run last year. And they've had a head-scratching start to the season. So along with a tough end to the last season. So we'll be keeping an eye on this division and trying to figure it out. The one thing I feel safe saying is that I don't think it's going to be the Texans.
I think, that seems fair. The Davis Mills thing was a sort of pleasant surprise, but also was never really that good last year. It was more of like a improving upon expectations for a guy that for a lot of people came out of nowhere. And this year, he's doing
exactly what they need if they want CJ Stroud or Bryce Young.
Yeah, there's not a ton of talent around him, skill position player wise, but there's not nothing. Like it's an okay collection of skill position players for that kind of team. So it's
for a tanking team, or for what kind of team?
Exactly.
Team?
Yeah,
they
for
have
a
good
bad
players
team.
For a bad team.
Yeah, good players for a bad team.
All right, they're the only 0-3-1 team. Let's wrap up with the 1-3s. In that range, we have the Lions, the Raiders, Panthers, Steelers, the New Orleans Saints, New England Patriots, and the Washington Communists. Any of those 1-3 teams that we think are maybe frisky? The Lions are fun on offense, at least. Can I interest you in some of that?
I think watchability, sure. Like, and a defense with a top pick who can get some sacks and whatever. They're a fun watch.
On the defensive side of the ball, they have gone a little unlucky in terms of pressure and sack percentage. They do have the fourth highest pressure percentage and 28th in sack percentage. So get a young Aiden Hutchinson to convert more of those sacks, and you might see them increase their efficiency ranking from 32nd to 30th.
This is when Bryce would point out that all of Hutchinson's sacks are effort sacks that we've seen so far this year. Very derogatory from him.
Yeah, he sent a cut up of all of his pressures and how it's a lot of
BT Rossler. Avoid that account. But I mean, I think a lot of these teams in this 1-3 range, they don't have their quarterbacks. They really need to sort that out in the future. At least the Lions are fun, like we talked about. The teams that I would look at in terms of maybe they can do some things from this. The Raiders had a really rough start to the season, but they've been especially bad in the red zone on offense and defense. We talked about red zone before. That's one thing that could regress to the mean. So I don't think the Raiders are one of the strongest teams, and I do think they're in a very tough division, but I'm not ready to totally write them off yet. And in the same class, I'd throw the Patriots. Mac Jones is injured. They seem to always start slow just because they're 1-3. I'd be shocked if they catch the Bills. The Bills look like, the number one team in the NFL right now. But like the Dolphins, the Patriots don't play a top 10 team in the SIS strength of schedule model until December. So there are opportunities in the AFC East for more than one team to potentially come out of there.
If I'm pulling for a team, I'm pulling for the Steelers here. And that's a weird thing for a Philly person to say, I suppose. But the Kenny Pickett story just feels heartwarming. And if he just continues never letting a ball hit the ground for like weeks, it would be awesome.
100% either completions or interceptions so far. James, I'll give you the last word on your boy Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, I'm really hoping for the best, but the ball might not hit the ground in terms of going towards the other team, who the Steelers now play the Bills, Buccaneers, and Eagles 3 out of the next 4 games, which are all top 5 in defensive efficiency. So, Kenny, I wish you the best, and welcome to the NFL.
Trubisky's going to be enjoying that one, huh?
Sure will be.
All right. For James Weaver, Alex Vigderman, and our producer, Justin Stein, I'm Matt Manocherian. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast.